Hello and welcome to Consciousness Central, coming to you from Toward a Science of Consciousness Conference 2015 at the University of Helsinki here in beautiful Finland. Join me, Nick Day, for the next 4 days of programming with debate, interviews, analysis and much, much more. Welcome. So I'd like to welcome our first guest to Consciousness Central 2015. This is Paavo Pelkkanen. He is the chair and the organizer of Toward a Science of Consciousness 2015 here in Helsinki, University of Helsinki in Finland. Paavo, welcome. Paavo is also a philosopher of mind.
Right.
And so perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about what was your vision for this year's conference and where are we going with it?
Okay, so some of the theme, I think one of the themes is this idea of structuralism, which is it comes from the question like what do the natural sciences, especially physics, tell us about reality? And one answer that has been quite prominent in recent years is that structure is more fundamental than things. And this could be like in fundamental physics, it might have to do with invariances or various kinds of relationships that stay the same while everything else seems to be more variable. And so the question arises, well, if structure is a fundamental feature of the universe, then what about consciousness? Because consciousness seems to have also some non-structural, more intrinsic, perhaps non-relational aspects to it. So this is one of the questions which may be a little bit new here in this conference, and so we have James Ladyman, Philip Goff, and Bill Seeger addressing that issue. So that would be an example of a new theme. And there are there's like the first session will be on body representation, collective emotions, two-person neuroscience. There are these kinds of new themes from neuroscience phenomenology. And I guess a constant theme in the TSC conference, like a leitmotif, are the quantum approaches. I mean, this was there, of course, with Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose back in '94 when it all began. And we have a pretty strong quantum leitmotif here. We had a pre-conference talk by Basil Hiley with the Bohm approach yesterday. And we have a couple of sessions on the theme, and also David Chalmers' keynote will be on consciousness collapse in the quantum wave function. So that, I guess, reflects my interest as well. But then I was lucky to have as co-chair Tuomas Tahko. We sit next door to each other in the philosophy department here. And he's this the young star of Finnish philosophy, and who works in metaphysics. And I think he also influenced the program by suggesting metaphysical themes, and which one can also see in the program. And I should also say that perhaps from the very beginning that we've been very lucky to have Päivi Seppälä as a conference manager. She's a PhD student in philosophy who also then wants to do something more practical. And it's been amazing how the way she's recruited people and looked after everything.
So last year, very much the debate was about the computationalists versus maybe the idealists and the panpsychists. Do you see that really developing this year as well?
Well, there is some of that in the debate. But then there are also some of these new themes that I think one interesting session will also be about the idea of consciousness as simulation, and this has to do with Antti Revonsuo, who is the person in Finland who has done much to construct consciousness studies research, also with the Academy of Finland, and then with Skövde University in Sweden. So this whole idea of consciousness as simulation, but also consciousness in dreams and even hypnotic experience. So I think we are focusing on some of these new areas. So I don't know whether panpsychism will be. it won't be the main theme this year, I would say.
Right. Of course, there are all these other areas in consciousness that perhaps last year we were somewhat aware of, but didn't focus so much on, as you say, things like hypnosis, altered states, dream research.
Right.
These are all very fascinating areas in their own right, and you've got people this year representing all of those positions.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get to speak to some of them at least on that.
Absolutely.
We'll get into that a little bit. I think I'll just say this, that it seems to me that the whole field of consciousness studies, the interest in consciousness, is just like opening up.
Right.
And it really plays to something very deep in, I guess, in our sort of human nature, like this question of who and what we are. And philosophers are kind of our guides in a way. Do you find now that you're being kind of swept along with this, and are you noticing this in Finland or internationally, that there's so much more interest in the subject?
Well, it's a good question, because you could also see that there are, not everybody thinks that consciousness is such a great topic for study. I mean, it's interesting to see. Of course, one very nice feature of this conference is that as one of our keynotes, we have Jaakko Hintikka, who is really, together with George Henrik von Wright, is if you like, the creator of philosophy in Finland. Philosophy is quite a strong subject in the Finnish tradition. And Hintikka is one of he will be talking on philosophy of neuroscience, and he probably won't be talking too much about consciousness as such, but still we're kind of connecting to this very strong line of analytical philosophy in Finland that way. And so, and somehow, he's kind of in a very special way, a patron of our conference as well. And he's just an amazing, it's kind of a river of creativity. If you look at his work over the years, like it probably starts from the 60s. It's just an amazing amount of creativity there. Now, but then I can imagine that some of the other generations of philosophy are perhaps not equally interested in it. So I think there is still some work to do. And I guess one of the troubles is, of course, that because consciousness is also controversial in the sense that there are still philosophers who think that there is no special problem with it, or that perhaps, let's say, the hard problem is not a genuine problem, and so on and so forth. So it could also be that some people feel that this is not, they rather philosophize other areas than get into this very difficult and perhaps endless debate about consciousness.
Right. We've got 4 days or 4 or 5 days of conference. We've got hopefully many guests to come and visit us here at Consciousness Central.
Right.
Want to thank you very much for hosting us.
Thanks.
And beautiful setting here, really great. So we'll maybe check in with you again a bit later and see how things are going. But thank you very much, Paavo.
Thank you.
We'll see you later.
Right, thanks.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you, Paavo Pelkkanen.
So we're here with the Tour de Science of Consciousness 2015, getting some color commentary, asking folks what they're up to. So tell us who you are, what you're doing here, and if there's any hopes for the week.
I'm Julian Kiverstein. I'm from the University of Amsterdam. I'm a philosopher. I'm here. I did a pre-conference workshop on dual aspect approaches to consciousness, and later on I'm going to do something about time.
All right.
Both of us are interested in embodied cognition and in active theories of consciousness.
Okay.
So I'm David Silverman. I work in Paris on a multidisciplinary project with Kevin O'Regan on a theory called the sensory motor theory. And I'm here to give a talk about an embodied approach to consciousness, but I'm also hoping to educate myself a little bit about what people say about consciousness more generally, because I'm working on a very newfangled theory, but I would like to hear about some of the more purely philosophical views and educate myself a little bit as well.
I'm Amalia Tsakiri. I am from Greece, and I am a PhD student in philosophy of cognitive science. it's the second time that I have been towards a Science of Consciousness conference. I was in Stockholm in 2011, and I think that this conference is organized very, very well. It's very friendly, it's very large, and here are people that I was dreaming to see and to know in all my academic career. So it's very exciting.
Good. So you're not just a researcher, you're also a fan.
I'm a fan, and I am a researcher in philosophy of cognitive science, in perception.
Great. And are you going to be giving a talk or a poster, or?
Yes, I will be giving a talk in Saturday morning.
Ah, great. Well, everyone come and see her if you're here, and if you're out there at home, is there any insight to your talk, like a very short summary? Is there a punchline?
I'm going to defend a thesis about constitution of a perceptual content, external constitution. I will defend the thesis that the external object is a constituent of a perception, that we are not passive observers of the environment, but environment is a part of our perception.
Well, my name is Hannes Bent. I'm a visiting scholar at the University of Oregon at the Institute of Neuroscience, and I'm presenting a paper here on Friday. And a lot of my research is on dimensionality, are dimensions real, and also about visual stimuli, how can we see how people respond psychophysiologically to digital images, virtual reality, and become consciously aware of it in a way.
Wow. Okay, so by asking the question of whether dimensions are real, do you mean space and time, 3 dimensions like that?
Yeah, exactly. I just had a conversation with a theoretical physicist, a retired physicist who was very much convinced that they are existing outside the human experience, and because he can experience them, and I find it fascinating. Is it just a mathematical construct, or is it identical with reality?
So what would be the alternative if dimensions weren't real? Would it just be an undifferentiated whole, or not quite?
No, I mean, I'm as you there, like questioning and reasoning, how can we consciously make sense of reality, and also by using dimensions eventually, or are they literally existing? And what do dimensions mean in that way?
Yeah.
And also, are there like discrete units? And just in general, the farther I reason about it, the more confusing it gets a little bit sometimes, even though it seems to be clear. But I just read an article in Quantum magazine, for instance, where quantum physicists are arguing that even quantum physics is in a way subjective, and there's no objective reality in that sense. So that's also interesting that you. Is there like an objective reality? What is consciousness?
So some of us in this crowd right now are maybe living in a 3 or 4 dimensions, and some of us may be living in quite a few more.
Well, I come from the humanities originally, or am still working in that field. So I think it's always like a good approach also to like question and reason about it to the point of uncertainty even, and maybe even staying in that uncertainty when you can't fully conclude and prove something. And I'm not sure if we can really prove that their dimensions are existing beyond the theoretical realm, even though we can engineer by using it as a methodology. So I think it's insightful, and at least worth the pursuit to inquire more about it.
Yeah, so we've got a critical thinker on our hands. Thank you very much for talking.
You guys.
My next guest is Basil Hiley. Basil is Emeritus Professor of Physics at the University College in London and also at Birkbeck College. Professor Hiley is known for his work with David Bohm, and I'd like to welcome you to Consciousness Central. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
And perhaps you could tell us a little bit, could you just give us an outline of the work you did with David Bohm?
Well, yes, I was very fortunate in being able to get a job straight after doing my PhD. David Bohm took the chair of theoretical physics at Birkbeck College, and I was appointed as a lowly assistant lecturer. And this struck up a great collaboration. I found him a very inspiring man. And I worked with him for over 30 years. In fact, the day he died, he was in my room at midday. And I had a telephone message when I got home to say, unfortunately, that he had actually died.
Wow.
Going home that day.
Okay.
So I was with him virtually until the end.
Until the very end.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a very powerful thing to hear. Could you, now David Bohm is obviously well renowned in the world of quantum physics because he, his interpretation of quantum physics gave rise to his idea of the implicate order, the explicate order, and this intersects quite interestingly with science of consciousness, this idea that there's something coming from the quantum field, and various people have used that as a way in to kind of come up with theories of consciousness. Could you explain what is the implicate order, what is the explicate order?
Well, the idea is the following, that one of the most strange things about quantum physics as such, and I think this idea did come from quantum physics, although David Bohm was read a lot about Hegel actually before he actually met me. So a lot of Hegel's ideas are in the background here. And this particular idea of the implicate order was that with the wave function, you can, you've essentially do not have the properties in an explicate form. Classical physics, everything is explicate. Position, momentum, you essentially got a world of snooker or pool or whatever. And you can just stand from the outside and look at it, and your equations actually describe what is going on. And you can see it. In quantum mechanics, what you find is that the properties, the classical properties, are hidden in the formalism. They're implicate in the formalism, and you have to do something to abstract them out. And you can't extract them all out simultaneously. There are sets which you can display on your billiard table at the expense of other properties. So you've got a very different view of what a property of a system is. And to accommodate this, David brought the idea of the implicate order, which was the background structure, and you explicate from that background structure the particular features of the particles or the system that you're trying to deal with. And that goes back that then goes into a very deep idea that perhaps nature is of that form. And as I'm trying to explain this to you, I'm trying to get hold of this structure which is in my brain, and I'm trying to explicate it. I'm trying to explicate it with words, and of course we know what happens with words. You never get across what you actually want to say.
Yeah, I think this is something that, well, one thing I like about Bohm's work is that for people who are not physicists, it gives us some sense of an understanding of a reality model that we can experience personally. As you said yourself, there is something implicate in my consciousness to create this sentence, explicate when I speak it to you, and there's some process going on which is somehow a bit hidden or mysterious.
But the revolution is that this is actually what's going on at the fundamental level in nature.
Yes.
To spot it going on there, rather, because most of the work that was done by Bohr, etc., was say, don't talk about it. Don't ask questions of what's happening to an electron between 2 points of measurement. And so that was what he was trying to get against. Now, can we actually find some descriptive form? I'm going back to the technical stuff now in the physics. Can we find some technical form where we can actually discuss what we thought was not discussable previously? In other words, you bring out different aspects of the implicate order and make it explicate rather than the usual ones.
Mm-hmm. David Bohm's model of things, how does it relate, say, for example, to time? Is time still this linear thing, or is it somehow lost? There's a whole different construct for time.
It depends how deep you go. One of the difficulties I've always had is going all the way. So what I'm very happy with saying is that actually we can go beyond space. To go beyond space and time is a difficult concept. So I've tended to stay, let me have time, and then we look at what we call pre-space. But within that, I've also got some models that we were discussing where time actually disappears as well. And we had this in terms of what we call the hollow movement. That we don't have particles moving around in space and time. We have basically the hollow movement, and from that hollow movement, which is an algebraic description for the people who are interested in technical terms. And from that you explicate the idea of particle, you explicate the idea of space, you explicate the idea of time. So that non-locality doesn't come as a surprise, because the whole theory is alocal, and you create locality from this alocal theory. That was the general philosophical ideas that we were developing.
Is there any way of understanding how this implicate, the nature of the implicate and the nature of the explicate? Because we obviously live in a world of, objects, biology. We seem to live in this universe of infinite space. It's an extraordinary experience to be in it. And but is there any sense of the nature of this versus the nature of the implicate, and how the two kind of correlate together?
I think we perceive the implicate right from the very basic, from the word go. As soon as we wake up, if you like, from your mother's womb, you start exploring the explicate order, touching, feeling, and so on and so forth, and you get the idea of objects. I remember in the early days when we were discussing these things way back in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of work was being done by Piaget on the development of concepts in youngsters. And there you could see that the youngster, if you come behind a couch and you bring a ball, you take it behind the couch so he can't see it, he immediately looks over there to see it's popping up. And he hasn't yet put in the idea that it moves behind his visible, his means of the way he can actually see it. So he's already constructing, or trying to construct, an explicate order from this. The fact that he's not seeing it, but it's still there. So you're beginning to construct that right from the word go.
So David Bohm entered into a lot of conversations with Krishnamurti.
Yes.
He spoke to people who perhaps would be considered well outside the field of science.
Yes.
And so
I can
think...
tell you, if I can stop you there, I can tell you why.
Yes, please do.
Because when he, and keep me to my point, won't you?
Yes, of course.
When he originally started, he started on quantum theory. And he wrote a book trying to explain quantum theory, and it was one of the best books at that time of explaining Bohr's particular view. But when he finished the book, he told me, he said, I still felt there was something wrong. He then made a proposal, which he published in Phys.Rev, and nobody liked it. They all attacked him for it. So that he was never able to talk to his physics colleagues about the ideas he had. So he had to find concepts from outside of physics. Because you're not going, if you keep yourself in the box, you're not going to do anything new. And so that's when he started moving outside. And the particular problem was the separation of the observer and the observed, which was the idea of wholeness I tried to deal with in my talk. Krishnamurti was a great advocate of the non-separation between the observer and the observed. Can I say something on public television? I never took to Krishnamurti, and I don't know what it was. It was a chemical problem. Because I ought to tell you, I grew up in India.
Oh, you did?
I grew up
excellent.
in India.
Oh, okay.
I was in the Punjab until I was about 12. So I had that Eastern background already imbibed in me. And there was but David got a lot of interest, and there were tremendous debates between the two people. But I never felt that was my area that I could enter into. Okay. So he developed that separately. Then he used to come back after a weekend with Krishnamurti down in the country. He'd start explaining to me what Krishnamurti was trying to say, and then I'd start my criticism, I'm afraid.
Wow. Well, okay, this is great. Very, very interesting to hear this, because obviously I think nowadays the dialogues between Bohm and Krishnamurti have become kind of legendary in certain parts.
I don't want to destroy that legend.
No, of course not. No, I understand. But I think
they were not for me.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
I think the interesting thing was that, a physicist could look, one of the big problems in the science of consciousness is we're trying to find a scientific way to describe something that is entirely subjective. And obviously most physicists are dealing with...
It's not entirely subjective.
Well, please elaborate on that.
I've opened myself up.
This is good. We want to...
No, because you see, in the type of thing that I was trying to do with David Bohm, getting this notion of active information. Now, normally information is thought to be something which is subjective. You give me some information and then I do whatever I want to do with it from my own perspective, and I either take some notice of it or I do nothing at all. But what we were finding in the microscopic world, that we could not explain the behavior by means of the simple, let me say, the efficient cause. I'm going back to Aristotle, pushing and pulling. But rather we needed something subtle, which is for the formative cause. And the form, if you think of the word information, David Bohm was very good at that, looking at the etymological origins of the word. And inform comes from forming from within. So what he thought was that, well, maybe these, at the fundamental level, these particles were actually using this extended idea of information from within. And therefore, what we think is subjective may not be subjective if nature is actually using some subtle notion like that. And he actually used the word manifest and subtle. The manifest is what we see of our outside world, presumably the concepts that we construct, and the subtle was this other subtle movement which is going on, which is very mental, very thought-like. Now, is that subjective or not? That's the question.
That is a good question.
And I looking at nature in this way, if you want to look at nature in this way, a lot of people don't want to look at it. A lot of people want to keep the old, everything must be explicate. But it's not going to work.
So as we come to the end of the opening day here at Toward a Science of Consciousness, one and only Cameron Keyes is with me now. He's been sitting in on the plenaries. Cameron, what happened today that we all should know about?
Well, we had 3 plenary talks today. We had Rita Hari, Laura Meister, and Dan Zahavy. Rita Hari is a famous local celebrity in the neuroscience community here in Finland. And she's interested in social interactions and how you can measure do neuroscientific experiments with real social interactions. So instead of just having people inside a lab solo and finding out, how they respond to a stimulus, you actually get real people interacting, and you put some device on their head, or you somehow measure the activity between 2 people. So she calls it a shift from first person or one person neuroscience to 2-person neuroscience. She says this is really important because humans are social animals, and if you want a real neuroscientific theory, if you leave out this basic aspect of what it is to be human, then you're not really doing a complete neuroscientific study. So she told us about quite a few experiments, 5 or 6 different really interesting experiments in this field. One that I'll just highlight is Fmri Study, so magnetic resonance imaging. You can actually put 2 people, say for example a husband and a wife, lay them down and have them hug and kiss, and they're attached to this machine and it's mapping what's happening in their brain.
Oh, wow.
And so you can see in real time at microsecond scale what's going on between two people. And so they've done a whole bunch of different kinds of studies with those sort of dynamics. For example, just giving 2 people and you tell them to play leader and follower. So you give them a little clicker, and then the clicker is attached to a machine, and they track the velocity of the clicker. And you ask the people to just play. So no rules, you just interact and see what happens. And when they really get in tune with each other, the velocities of those movements start to match really, really closely. And this is a really complicated task for the brain to do, and yet humans are just really good at it. So to get imaging of those kind of research kind of moves neuroscience forward a little bit. So that was exciting. Laura Meister from the University College in London, she spoke about the difference between a bodily conception of the self and a conceptual side of the self. Now, and she says that these are coming from the same place. It's just we have this image of the separation of the mind and the body. And in some sense, they really are separate, but they're linked in really interesting ways. And so she does experiments to find out about how they're linked. So, for example, she studies bodily illusions, where you can devise an experiment to give people an experience of, say, thinking that a rubber hand is their own hand, or that a face in the mirror is really their face when actually it's another person's face. So they devised some experiments to test these things, and then they can apply it to very interesting social and neuroscientific questions, like for example, racial bias, implicit racial bias. If you can give a research subject a test to find out how they feel about people of different skin tones and things like that, then you play an experiment with them where they're induced to believe that that person from the other group is actually them, and then you give them a post-test, the same racial attitudes test, and you find that they perceive people much more familiarity and much more acceptance of people who look differently. And so the idea is that the brain is capable of tricking itself and to using those that complexity that it has to solve these social issues. And the final talk was from Dan Zahavy. He is a philosopher that studies empathy, so the emotional life. And he's going through a lot of different conceptions of what empathy is. Is it shared emotion, where I, in the present moment, experience the same emotion that you're experiencing? Is it enough for me to just have a memory of that experience? So do I have to be connected with you intensely in the present moment, or can I just identify in the future or in the past? Or is empathy something slightly different? Is it just a basic knowledge of what it is to be human, and then combined with some awareness of the collective intentionality, the shared projects that we have, if we want to build something together, if we have some project that we're working on. And so he really diced all these really fine level distinctions in the literature and put forth his own view, which is that collective intentionality is really central to what empathy should be, or maybe that we should leave behind empathy and just look at collective intentionality to really find out what it is that's at the basis of group behavior. What is it to form a collective and to call ourselves we instead of I or me, to view myself as a part of a group. And so he's trying to get at the philosophy that might underpin and support some of this social neuroscience. So it was a fascinating day.
Wow, that's amazing, Cameron. So some of these are really topics that intersect with the real world, proper, potential for helping solve social situations or social problems, increasing our awareness and knowledge of ourselves as human beings. It sounds like really very practical, solid stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad that the social neuroscientists are actually starting to engage these social realities, because instead of just being huddled in your laboratory, it's worthwhile to engage those things.
It's a little bit easy to get stuck in the whole sort of theoretical side of things, and we have to remember that consciousness is sort of somehow an active life thing that's affecting us all the time.
That's right. Yeah, and it's also a question about what's the purpose of science. Is it just to find out about the world, or is it also to help change the world?
Yeah.
And so engaging those things is useful.
All right, great. Thank you. Fantastic. Once again, a fantastic roundup.
Thank you.
We'll see you this time tomorrow, and hopefully for some more amazing stuff that's taking place every day.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Cameron Keyes. So that about wraps it for today's first program from Toward a Science of Consciousness 2015. Join us tomorrow for more at Consciousness Central. Hello and welcome to Consciousness Central.